A man stood up from the couch when I walked through the front door of the farmhouse my late husband Colin had forbidden me from visiting for the entire 23 years of our marriage. His name was Roberto. He was somewhere in his late 60s, short, white-haired, with the kind of hands that have spent decades doing careful, quiet work. He looked at me for about 4 seconds without speaking. Then he told me he'd been expecting me. He said Colin told him 11 weeks before he died that I would eventually come through that front door. And when I did, Roberto should not try to soften what he was about to say. He turned his head toward the doorway of the living room, visible from the foyer where I was standing, and he said the thing I am going to spend the rest of the story trying to explain to you. He said, "This is Matthew. He's Colin's son. He's been waiting his whole life to meet you. I want to tell you what I saw when I looked into that living room. There was a wheelchair, and the man in it was not a boy, but a 34-year-old human being whose body had been shaped by the particular hand of severe cerebral palsy into a form that no medical textbook could have entirely prepared me for. And his eyes, which were the exact same shade of pale green as his father's eyes, found mine across approximately 12 feet of farmhouse hallway and stopped. He made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when they have been waiting a very long time for something they were not entirely sure was going to happen. Roberto walked to the wheelchair. He put his hand on Matthew's shoulder. He said his name twice in the steady, patient voice of a man who had been saying his name that way for the previous 22 years. He said, "Matthew, this is Sarah. This is the woman your father married." Matthew looked at me. He made the sound again. I stood in the foyer of the farmhouse my husband had forbidden me from visiting for 23 years, and I spent the next 90 seconds trying to remember how to breathe. My name is Sarah McGovern. I am 48 years old. I run a small architecture firm out of a converted office space on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, that I built from nothing 15 years ago. I drive a 2018 Honda Civic with a heating dial that has not worked correctly since the winter before last, and that I have not gotten around to fixing because there is always something else. My husband Colin McGovern was a high school history teacher at a public school in Westerville. He died 11 months ago of prostate cancer. He was 50 years old. We were married for 23 years. In those 23 years, he made approximately 276 trips to his late parents' farmhouse on the third weekend of every month, a 100-mile route between our house in the Clintonville neighborhood of Columbus and a piece of agricultural land just outside Polk in Ashland County that I had never set foot on before the morning I am about to describe to you. He told me on our second date that the farmhouse was not a place he was prepared to take anyone. He told me on the first night we spent together that he would never under any circumstances bring me there. He told me on the morning of our wedding that I should not, for the rest of our lives together, ask him about it. I did not ask him about it for 23 years. I had driven to that farmhouse on the morning I have been describing with one specific plan. The plan was to walk through the rooms, take photographs on my phone, and send them that same afternoon to a real estate agent in Ashland named Donna Whitaker, who had been waiting at my request for the previous 3 weeks to list the property for sale. I had no use for a rural farmhouse 100 miles from where I lived. I was going to take the money from the sale, put it in the account Colin and I had shared for 23 years, and close a chapter of my life I had been politely declining to ask about for most of my adult life. That was the plan. The plan, by Roberto's quiet announcement in the foyer approximately 90 seconds after I walked through the front door, was not going to happen. Roberto made me a cup of coffee at the kitchen table while Matthew sat in his wheelchair in the living room watching a children's program on a television set positioned at exactly the angle his neck could comfortably hold. He told me in the measured voice of a 68-year-old man who had been preparing to have this exact conversation for the previous 11 weeks that my husband Colin had a son. He told me Matthew was born when Colin was 17 years old. He told me Matthew was born with severe cerebral palsy, the result of a complication during labor that, in a rural Ohio hospital in the early 1990s, a 17-year-old with no prenatal care and no family advocate in the delivery room was not reliably going to walk away from with an undamaged child. He told me Matthew's biological mother, a girl Colin had been seeing in secret for several months, left the hospital on the third day and did not come back. He told me Colin's parents, German Lutheran immigrants who had come to the United States in the late 1970s with 2 children and a set of convictions about family honor that did not bend easily, sat Colin down at the kitchen table of this same farmhouse and told him the child would not be discussed. Not with friends. Not with teachers. Not with future partners. Not with any living person not present at that kitchen table on that night. Colin was 17. He agreed. His parents died in a car accident 11 months later, on Interstate 71 outside Ashland, driving home from a church convention in Cleveland. It was raining. The promise outlived them. Colin inherited the farmhouse, moved Matthew in, hired caregivers, set up a trust through an attorney in Cleveland, and kept his promise for the next 33 years. He visited every third weekend. He paid for everything out of a salary and savings account that, by Roberto's quiet accounting, had never once reflected the lifestyle Colin could have afforded.
And he did not tell me.
Not once. Not in 23 years. Roberto handed me a letter Colin had left with his attorney. The handwriting was Colin's. That same slightly cramped, very careful cursive I had been reading for 23 years. Grocery lists. Birthday cards. Little notes left on the kitchen counter when he left early for school. Sarah, if you're reading this, I am gone. And you are about to learn the thing I should have told you 23 years ago. I am sorry. I have been trying to find the right moment for most of our marriage. I don't think such a moment exists. I have a son. His name is Matthew. He is 34 years old. He was born when I was 17. He has cerebral palsy. He cannot walk. He cannot speak. He will never live independently. He has lived at my parents' farmhouse in Ashland County his entire life, in the care of people I hired and paid out of my own savings since I was 19 years old. I visited him every third weekend while you were home in Clintonville, reading on the porch or drafting plans at your desk or doing all the things you do when you are living a life I never fully let you share with me. I am sorry I lied to you about where I was going. I am sorry I lied to you about everything. The reason I didn't tell you was not that I didn't trust you. The reason I didn't tell you was that I made a promise to my parents on the night they sat me down at this same kitchen table, and I was 17 years old, and they were crying, and the promise became so old and so heavy that by the time I met you, I no longer knew how to put it down. I am not asking you to be his mother. I gave up the right to ask you for anything when I made the choice not to tell you he existed. I am only asking for one thing. Visit him once. Just one Saturday. He has had your photograph on his bedside table for 20 years. He knows your name. He knows your face. He has been waiting in the patient way Matthew waits for things. I loved you. I will love you for as long as anything of me continues to exist after this letter is finished.
Colin.
I read that letter 4 times. The first time the way a person reads a letter from their dead husband when they are still trying to understand what it is saying. The second time after they have understood. The third time when they are angry. The fourth time when they are no longer angry but do not yet know what they are instead. I thought about the third weekends of the previous 23 years. I thought about the way Colin would get quiet on the Friday before, the way he would pack a bag the night before and leave by 6 in the morning without making coffee, which was unlike him, because on every other morning of 23 years he made coffee, because I now understood. He didn't want the smell of it to wake me up and start a conversation he'd have to lie his way through. I thought about the particular silence he came home in on those Sunday evenings. Not the tired silence of a man who had been driving all day, but the heavier silence of a man who had been carrying something I was never equipped to understand. I thought about every time I asked him, at his 40th birthday, the year his college roommate died, the morning we found out together that we weren't going to have children, why he always felt so far away. And every time he said he was fine, he was just tired. The sun came up at 5:49. I made coffee. I poured it in a thermos. I put on the same green jacket I had been wearing to job sites for the last 7 years. And I drove back to the farmhouse the next morning. I took the back roads. I don't entirely know why. The 6 months that followed rebuilt my life from the studs. I didn't sell the farmhouse. I sold my condo in Clintonville to a young couple expecting their first baby in the fall. I moved into the farmhouse. I converted the back bedroom into a home office. I learned from Roberto and his colleague Anya the steady rhythms of caring for a 34-year-old man with severe cerebral palsy. I learned how to move him from his wheelchair to his bed without hurting either of us. I learned what he liked for breakfast on a weekday and what he liked to watch on a Saturday afternoon. I learned what his sounds meant in the private vocabulary of a young man whose father had, for 34 years, been the person most able to translate them. 3 weeks ago, on a Saturday morning, something happened.
It was the third weekend of the month.
Matthew and I were on the front porch. Roberto had brought us coffee. The sun was up. The cows from the dairy farm half a mile down the road were making their sounds. I was reading the front page of the Akron Beacon Journal out loud. Matthew was making the sound he makes when he is content. I looked at him for about a minute. Then I looked at the photograph of Colin that Roberto had placed on the windowsill inside, the one from Matthew's bedside table, moved somewhere both of them could see it from the porch. And I want to tell you what I had not understood about my marriage until that exact morning. For 23 years, I thought I was married to a private man who didn't like talking about his feelings. I thought his parents' early deaths had closed something in him that never fully reopened. I thought he loved me but kept a part of himself at a distance I was never quite able to cross, no matter how long we were together. I was wrong. He wasn't hiding from me.
He was carrying.
He had been carrying something he picked up at 17 in a farmhouse kitchen and could not put down, something that by the time he met me had been carried so long it had calcified into a thing he no longer knew how to name out loud. He couldn't have children with me because he already had one. He didn't talk about his parents because they were the ones who asked him to carry it. He kept his weekends separate because his weekends belonged to a child I didn't know existed. He felt far away because part of him always was. I had been married for 23 years to a man who was carrying something I could have helped him carry, and who couldn't ask me to help because he had promised, at 17, in a kitchen I'm now sitting in, that he would carry it alone. I told him that morning, in the quiet private voice you use when you are talking to a husband who has been gone for 12 months. I told him I had been wrong about him. I told him he wasn't hiding. He was carrying. I told him the man I married was the strongest person I had ever known, and that I was sorry I spent 23 years not fully seeing it. Matthew made the sound he makes when he is content. I went back to reading the front page. The cows kept making their sounds. Roberto went inside to start lunch. It was about 9:30 in the morning. A school bus went past on the county road. Matthew watched it. He made the sound he makes every morning when the school bus goes by. The same sound, Roberto told me later, he has made at that school bus on every weekday morning of every year his father came to sit on this porch with him, and every year he didn't. I made a note to be on this porch again tomorrow at the same time. I am going to learn every single sound. What did the person you loved most carry alone? How long did it take you to see it? Tell me in the comments. One sentence is enough. I read every single one. Some of you reading this tonight have been married to someone who carried something they never told you. Some of those things were small. Some of them were not small. Some of them were the kind of thing a person carries alone for 30 years because the promise was made before you existed in their life, and by the time you did, the carrying had been going on so long they no longer knew how to stop. You don't always know what the person you love is holding. Most people don't. Sometimes you find out while they're still alive. Sometimes you find out at the kitchen table of a farmhouse you didn't know existed, half a year after the funeral, with a letter in your hand and a 34-year-old stepson in the next room making a sound you don't yet know how to translate. Tell me what they carried. Tell me when you found out. Tell me what you did with what you learned. I will read every single one.